Remember those days when going out just came down to figuring out if you wanted to deal with the hassle of being in public? Maybe the only kinds of questions you asked yourself were, do I feel like dealing with a crowd or looking for parking? I mean, you expect some headache. It's part of the price you pay to make the memories, I guess. But now millions of people are dealing with the reality that we have come to expect gun violence when we go out, or at least the potential for that gun violence. And frankly, it's affecting the way that people even live their lives, the choices they make. I can't lie, it factors into my decisions about where to take my own children. It's a struggle to not let the terror of it all win, to not have to revisit the plan that my husband and I had to lay out in case of an emergency. Which parent will take which child? What's the meeting spot in case we're separated? The agreement not to go back for one another and just get the kids to safety. Maybe the hope that our children will remember to run if we ourselves are hurt. All of this planning, all of this thoughts because of pervasive, frequent, unrelenting gun violence. I remember when I first took my kids to watch the fireworks, and none of us parents were watching the fireworks as they were. We were watching our kids watch them, just to try to see what the world looked like through their eyes. And now when we go out, our heads are on swivels, assessing the continuous threat that is as unpredictable as it is everywhere. And last night I watched my own kids watching the fireworks, and they were naive to the fact that, well, places of worship and to some extent schools and grocery stores and theaters and now parades, they were no longer immune. And the great tragic irony of it all was that even on the day that we celebrated our nation's independence, the land of the free and the home of the brave, that was still not free from the terror of a mass shooting. And what's bursting in air only gives proof through the night that our national epidemic of gun violence is still very much here. And this, by the way, is with the new legislation. So what now? When will we feel that freedom? I want to bring in CNN political commentators Paul Begala and Alice Stewart. And I have to tell you both, we've all had these conversations in the past as well, and we continue to have them about these ideas of how we live under this constant sword of Damocles. And Paul, I mean, listen to this. Look at this picture of a Lake County police officer. He's in Highland Park. He's holding his head in utter shock and despair. I mean, there have been 319 mass shootings just this year and 17 in the first 4 days of July. I mean, you're talking about a parade, bars, a hospital, a grocery store. I mean, the violence, as I've talked about, it's like it's fundamentally altering how we live our lives. So I wonder, from your perspective, Paul, what needs to happen for that to no longer be the case?
Well, it was a hopeful first step, a small step, but a first step, the first time in almost 30 years that Congress passed any kind of gun safety law. And enough Republicans, God bless them, came along with it. John Cornyn from Texas, my home state. That's a hopeful sign. It was necessary, but not sufficient. Boy, was it not sufficient. We know that. I think the problem here, frankly, is fear. That politicians, and let's be honest, Republican politicians, are fearful. I think it's a myth that people say the NRA is all powerful. You know, 84% of gun owners are not members of the NRA. By the way, I am a gun owner and a hunter, and I'm not in the NRA. Those knuckleheads don't speak for me or most responsible gun owners. But the politicians in the Republican Party are afraid. They're afraid of their base. And if we could show them, if everybody who says in a poll, yeah, look, I want red flag laws, I want to ban assault weapons, high-capacity magazines are only good for mass shooters, if we would back those politicians up with our votes, let's see what happens in this midterm election. You know, it's Willie Nelson, my friend, my hero, the great singer in Texas, has a song. He said, if you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. It is as simple as that. We're less than 200 days from an election. If we really want change, we have to be the change that we seek in the world.
Alice, is he right? I mean, part of this, the idea of democracy not being a spectator sport, I absolutely agree with. The NRA and other gun lobbyists, though, have seemingly been quite powerful over a long period, at least modern American history. I wonder the impact they've had in your mind in terms of either Republican voters or Republican members of Congress on this very issue. I mean, should there have been more included, and is it possible to have that now?
Look, let me first start off by saying, Laura, I got chills listening to your monologue you just gave about you and your husband having a plan when you take your kids out as to what you would do in that situation and not returning to the location and making sure your children are safe. And sadly, parents across the country are having similar conversations, and we don't need to continue to have those conversations. So I think it is important to have talks about what can be done. Look, I think the Safe Communities Act is a very important first step. I think it's critical that we not only enact laws to prevent gun violence, but make sure that we do everything we can that they are implemented. Look, the red flag law is part of the Safe Communities Act. Look, that would have applied in this case, textbook case. This shooter in this case, his social media posts, his comments, his actions, he is a mass shooting suspect, time bomb ready to explode. And no one reported it. No one raised the red flag. Law enforcement, as you mentioned, Laura, were called to his home twice in 2019, and he still was able to purchase the gun. I think the fact that the Safe Communities Act put $750 million to help states implement that is a good first step, but we can't just pass laws, we have to implement them. And we also must look at the mental health component of this, and also the expanded background checks on 18 to 21-year-olds is critical. That's a big part of this. But so much emphasis is often put on the guns. Look, we cannot just look at the objects here. We need to look at the offenders. And the more we can look at offenders in this case and the mental health and using these red flags to prevent these is a very good first step. I'm not opposed to looking at curtailing AR assault rifles to those under 21, but it's an important conversation that needs to be had by Republicans and Democrats in Washington.
See, Paul, I mean, the idea of more reasonable Republicans. Alice Stewart is a case study point for you. Right? There you go, right there on this very notion to make your point. But you spoke about implementation, both of you. Just everyone should be aware that Highland Park actually did try to implement their own assault weapons ban. It went to the Supreme Court. And this is an instance where even the best laid plans, they say, of mice and men came to this in some respect. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.